Iron Man is without a doubt the biggest playboy in the Marvel Universe, and his hookup list is seemingly endless. Personally, I've been calling Tony Stark robot narcissist for years because he reminds me of almost every single ex-boyfriend I've ever had. Tony is a self-absorbed know-it-all who would rather spend time looking at himself in the mirror than almost anything else on the planet. But he's also insanely smart, incredibly funny, unceasingly interesting, and totally hot. Combine all those things together and you have the world's worst boyfriend, but also the world's most outrageous partier and the coolest superhero. Fuck. Who am I kidding? I'd date Iron Man in a heartbeat, and then he'd break up with me and I'd spend the next 6 months drinking whiskey in my bathtub crying. Tight! Before we get started, just a friendly reminder that the Marvel Universe is vast and varied, so don't hold it against me if I miss something. I'm Whitney Van Lanningham, and these are Iron Man's comic book hookups. Tony Stark's very first girlfriend was Meredith McCall back when they were teenagers. These guys had a whole Romeo and Juliet thing going on, and their fathers ended up sending them to separate colleges just because they were business rivals. Tony and Meredith reconnected years later when Meredith was working at the insane asylum where the controller was being held. Iron Man ends up saving her, but after reading her hospital file and learning that she's now married, he decides not to pursue her romantically. Which is kind of hilarious that Iron Man draws the line at home wrecking, but whatever. Next up, we have Sunset Bane, who has by far the sluttiest name I've ever heard in my entire life. Kinda love it. This girl is a bad bitch with killer intellect and unparalleled manipulation tactics. She attends MIT with Tony even though she's 5 years older than him, and convinces Tony to hide their relationship from his parents, presumably so that they won't find out he's dating a cougar. Sunset ends up seducing Tony and convincing him to reveal the security codes for Stark Industries, and sends masked men in the middle of the night to steal Tony's dad's prototypes. She promptly dumps Tony and starts her own company, Banetronics Incorporated. Honestly, Sunset was kind of a bitch and Tony deserves better. Alright, this is the part of the storyline where things get a little fucky because Marvel has switched up Iron Man's war opposition status like 3 times to keep up with modern politics. In one timeline, he gets injured in Soviet-controlled China, in the 90s it was the Gulf War, and in the 2000s in the Iron Man films it was Afghanistan. But in the 1963 version, Tony Stark flew to Vietnam during the war to check out Stark Industries' field capabilities. While walking through the jungle, he trips on a landmine, killing everyone around him. During this time, Tony is engaged to a woman named Joanna Navina, his first fiancée in the comics. With his new metal chest plate locked in place in order to keep him alive, Tony convinces himself that he'll never be able to be a good husband to her because of his injuries and breaks off the engagement. Years later, they see each other again, and Tony explains the real reason why he left her all those years ago. Joanna is happily married with children at this point, so the two of them remain friends. That same year, Tony Stark hired Virginia Potts to be his personal assistant after she caught a major accounting error that would have lost Stark Industries tons of money. Pepper quickly falls in love with Tony Stark and even tells Tony's bodyguard, Happy Hogan, that she can't go out with him because she's saving herself to be the next Mrs. Stark. But then Tony pretends to ask her out on a date in order to give himself an alibi to change into his Iron Man suit and locks her in a room, and Pepper gets really upset with him. Of course, because he's robot narcissist and impeccable at being simultaneously self-serving and intriguing, she continues to try to impress him even after he totally disrespected her. Girl, I have been there. She ends up taking Happy to a Stark employees dinner as a substitute, and Happy assumes that Pepper is actually into him. Tony decides to encourage their relationship by buying them Broadway tickets, but eventually asks out Pepper himself. Happy and Pepper get married, and Pepper starts to fear that Happy will die or become more severely injured if he continues to step up as Tony's backup Iron Man, so she quits her job at Stark Industries to take care of her new husband. But the call to be by Iron Man's side proved to be too strong, and she ends up saving him from being frozen to death by the blizzard. After Pepper and Happy get divorced, Pepper keeps in constant contact with Iron Man, which does not help Happy's self-confidence at all. Unfortunately, after World War VIII, Tony's moral compass is inverted and he becomes even more egotistical and starts drinking like a monster. Pepper tries to save him from himself, but ultimately she can't and decides to put herself first and move on. She ends up discrediting him in the media and delivering a scathing monologue to him to show him that his selfish, fucked up actions have real consequences. In Tales of Suspense 89, Tony hooked up with 3 chicks, Babs, Cynthia, and Nan, in order to get over Pepper. Obviously, none of these relationships really panned out because they were total rebounds for Tony. Tony's next serious relationship was with Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow. The two of them were pretty hot and heavy until Tony found out that she was a Russian spy. Kinda killed the mood there, you know? Black Widow continually tried to attack Iron Man, aided by her buddy Hawkeye, but Tony Stark kept foiling her plans to infiltrate Stark Industries. When Black Widow decided to switch her allegiance to the West, she joined the Avengers and ended up being one of Tony's greatest allies and friends. In Iron Man 12, Tony starts dating Janice Cord, the daughter of one of his biggest business rivals, Drexel Cord. Of course, her father forbade their relationship, but after his death, the two of them started a serious relationship. Sadly, Janice died in Iron Man's arms during a battle between Iron Man, Titanium Man, and Crimson Dynamo. When she dies, she's completely unaware that she's in her boyfriend's arms. After that, Iron Man starts dating Marianne Rogers, a psychic with uncontrollable powers. She claims to be able to see the future and believed that she would ultimately cause the death of Iron Man. Tragically, her powers began to drive her insane, and she ended up in the nut house. Next up, we have Whitney Frost, a badass babe who still seeks out one of the richest, most handsome men in the world, despite being horribly disfigured by facial scars. Honestly, I'd kill to have that kind of confidence. Because of her shady connections to the cartel, Stark and Frost agreed that they would not date publicly as their true identities, but rather as Madame Mask and Iron Man. Understandably, their relationship came to a sudden halt when Iron Man accidentally killed Whitney's dad. Whoops. She ended up being one of Iron Man's worst enemies, which kinda sucks, but I also totally get it. Tony then hires Bethany Cabe to be his new bodyguard, but of course she ended up falling in love with him. At first, Bethany really hates Iron Man because she feels like he's never around when Tony actually needs him. But after putting two and two together, she realizes that the reason why they're never in the same room together is because they're actually the same person. Bethany ends up being a really great match for Tony Stark. She helps him get back on the wagon after his extreme alcoholic bender, and ended up becoming his best friend and lover. The two of them seem completely perfect together until Bethany finds out that her husband, who she believed to be dead, was still alive and living in Germany. I was really sad about this one because I felt like she was the most positive romantic partner he ever had, and I was really rooting for them to work out. After that, Tony began dating Janet Van Dyne, aka Wasp, aka Hank Pym's ex-wife. She has no idea that Tony is actually Iron Man, and Captain America confronts him and persuades him to tell her the truth. Of course, Janet is horrified because she would never under any circumstances date one of her ex's best friends. Indra's Moomji was Iron Man's next girlfriend, and a real stone-cold bitch. She was raised by the Sisterhood of Ishtar to always be as attractive to men as possible, and has had a ton of plastic surgery to enhance her already natural beauty. Preying on Tony's weaknesses for beautiful women, she tricks him into dating her by posing as a threatened bystander during a disaster that Iron Man was intervening on. He brought her gifts while she recovered in the hospital, and Indris used her pheromones to further seduce him. Even though she knew that he was a recovering alcoholic, she kept egging him on to drink and continually put herself in harm's way so that he'd have to risk his life to save her. She finally rejected him in a totally cruel way, and Iron Man starts drinking again to get over her. On a fresh new bender, Tony starts dating Heather Glenn, another alcoholic who further encourages his downward spiral. The two of them drove each other deeper and deeper into alcoholism, and Tony ended up homeless, unable to access his fortune. Heather ends up killing herself when her depression gets the best of her, so that's really fucking sad. Tony's next horrible relationship was with Bree Daniels, who essentially just used him to meet fancy Hollywood people. She used Tony to climb her way to the top and dumped him as soon as she was famous. After that, Tony briefly dated a Beverly Hills beauty salon owner named Ray Lacoste, but their relationship never ended up getting very serious. Following this pattern of horrible relationship decisions, Tony starts dating Kathy Dare. He tries to tell her that their relationship would not be serious or exclusive, but Kathy became uncontrollably jealous and possessive. When he tried to break up with her, Kathy shot him and crippled him. She also ended up committing suicide when the guilt of what she had done overcame her. While recovering from his spinal injury, Tony fell in love with his neurologist, Dr. Sue Yin. Unfortunately, Sue was already married and refused to take the relationship any further because she didn't want to cheat on her husband. Apparently, Tony's really into the whole Florence Nightingale thing because he starts dating Veronica Benning, his physiotherapist, soon after that. Veronica helps him learn to walk again, and it seems like the two of them are really starting to get close. But a virus takes over Tony's body and he starts drinking and being a dick to her again, so she leaves. Next, Tony meets Rumiko Fujikawa when her company takes over Stark Industries to become Stark Fujikawa. She's clearly only dating him to get back at her dad, and he ends up catching her banging his rival, Tiberius Stone. After Tony gives up his fortune and starts working under the alias Hogan Potts, he's hired to work with Callista Hancock at her company, Askew Electronics. The two of them date until Callista finds out that Hogan Potts is actually Tony Stark, and she gets super pissed off and breaks it off with him. When Tony is injured in Sarawak, he meets Anna Way when she saves his life and helps him get his supersuit back. They didn't date for very long, but they ended things on good terms, and Tony ended up hiring her to work at one of his companies in San Francisco. In the Invincible Iron Man 10, Tony Stark and Maria Hill share a moment of weakness when they think that the world is going to end and have super hot sex in Tony's armory. During the Civil War timeline, it's hinted that Iron Man may have dated Emma Frost in the past. He approaches her looking for anyone who will be on his side and hints that they used to have a fuck buddy relationship in the past when both of them were single. Honestly, their conversation is pretty steamy, and I wonder if their little arrangement is actually over. At this point, Earth girls are easy, so our playboy billionaire decides to try his charm on Gamora while helping out with the Guardians of the Galaxy. After some space tequila, Gamora sides, "What the hell, I'll give this cocky bastard a shot," then proceeds to break him harder than Bane broke Batman. Poor Tony must have been limping around for a month after that. Too bad for his ego too, because Gamora didn't seem all that impressed. And finally, honorable mention goes to Steve Rogers, because we're all totally shipping them, right? Okay, cool. Did I get all of them? Man, I hope so. Iron Man has definitely gotten around town, so it wasn't an easy feat tracking down every single lady Tony Stark played hide the sausage with. Let me know if I missed any of Iron Man's hottest hookups in the comments below, and be sure to tell me which of his girlfriends you like the best. Like and subscribe to Obsessed for more superhero stuff, and I'm gonna go get myself some shawarma.